In one of my episodes earlier this week, I talked about Mali suspending all French media from operating in Mali over malicious disinformation campaign. And this episode is a continuation of that story because something has been happening in Mali this past few months that, honestly, it's beginning to expose a massive disconnect between what Western powers are telling us and what is actually going on the ground. I have been tracking this diplomatic firestorm, and here is what American officials are saying. They are painting Mali as this nation that is basically paralyzed by an Al-Qaeda fuel blockade. They are saying the country is on the edge. Jihadists are spreading south into Benin Republic, into Togo. This story, it is everywhere. Go to the international media, diplomatic channels, you name it. They are telling us this picture of a state in total freefall. But here is the thing. Malian government and analysts across the continent, they are pushing back hard, and I mean very hard. They are saying this whole narrative doesn't match what is actually happening on ground. What the West calls a nationwide blockade that is strangling the country, Mali says no. That was targeted sabotage on civilian energy infrastructure. And get this, Malian government, Malian military responded in hours, not days. We are talking airstrikes hitting militant positions, hostages being rescued, supply convoys getting escorted through. The situation, they are managing it. But there is something else going on here. Questions keep coming up about these armed groups like JNM, group that, let's be honest, have been suspected of getting external support and training. Why are they being downplayed in foreign media and foreign briefings? Why does the West seem so invested in inflating a crisis that Mali clearly demonstrated it could contain? So let's dig into this. Let's examine how Mali exposed these contradictions in the Western narrative and what it tells us about who really controls the story of African security. This is the untold truth about power, resources, and flat-out deception in the Sahel. Let's get into it. So America had a story at the United Nations through all their diplomatic channels. US officials are describing Mali as being crippled by this Al-Qaeda fuel blockade that is basically paralyzing the entire nation. They are saying fuel prices have gone through the roof. Schools are shutting down. The government is losing control. And I will admit it, it's a compelling narrative. It's urgent. It's the exact kind of crisis that gets international concern, that justify, or should I say, that appears to justify Western intervention. But here is where it gets interesting. The story doesn't match what people on ground are actually seeing. Malian government, they are telling a completely different version. They are saying the fuel situation isn't some nationwide blockade orchestrated by jihadists who are gaining power. No, they are calling it targeted sabotage by militant cells trying to disrupt civilian infrastructure. And here is the crucial part here. Malian armed forces responded with speed and precision. We are talking airstrikes launched, militant hideouts destroyed, hostages rescued. Within days, not weeks or months that the Western media has been parading, within weeks and days, convoys were moving again, escorted by military units, protected by Russian-backed African Corps forces. The contradiction here is, it is stark. If what Western media is saying is true, if jihadists are really strangling Mali into submission, how did the military respond so effectively? If JNM is on the verge of overrunning the capital, Bamako, why haven't they seized this moment of, for a lack of a better word, supposed chaos to advance closer to Bamako? This is where their narrative just falls apart. Mali's counter statement, it is suggesting something else entirely is happening here. External actors are inflating a security incident into a full-blown geopolitical crisis. And not to help Mali, no, to serve their own interest in the region. And in doing that, they got caught in a lie. So the urgent question becomes, why are Western powers so invested in making Mali look weak and bad than it actually is? And who is benefiting from this deception? The US narratives at the United Nations was precise and alarming. Officials are painting this picture of Mali under siege. They are talking about a fuel blockade that is crippling the economy. They are warning that Al-Qaeda expansion into Benin Republic and Togo is imminent. They are suggesting Mali's military government, even with Russian backing, can't defend its own capital. Schools shut down, hospitals running out of fuel, population suffering. The implications, it is crystal clear here. Mali is failing. That is what Western media want us to believe. They amplified this version relentlessly. Major international media running headline about Mali descent into chaos. We have analysts from the West and their think tank publishing reports back to back about jihadists about to take over Mali. This narrative was everywhere and it was consistent. Mali was collapsing according to their own narrative. But on the ground in Mali, something different is happening, because when JNIM announced the blockade earlier in September, Mali's government didn't panic. They mobilized within days and within hours. I'm talking within days. Airstrikes were hitting militant positions in Diema and Nioro. Military convoys are being organized and protected. Hostages are being rescued from militant camps. The government is announcing that fuel supplies are being restored. Operations are ongoing to clear militant checkpoints. And here's what's really significant here. Mali's foreign minister, Abdoulaye Diop, he makes this direct statement to the diplomatic corps. The fuel crisis was artificially created from outside to destabilize the country. He's saying it was deliberately engineered to provoke a popular uprising. And this isn't new. He's saying this is a pattern the West has used before. You create instability. You frame it as government failure. Then you use it to justify intervention or regime change. The Malian narrative, they are saying that the country is under control. And the evidence, it seemed to support this claim. Fuel convoys did continue. Life did resume. The military was actively fighting back. To understand this moment, you have to go back, and you have to really go back to Libya. 2011, NATO, led by France, supported by Western powers, they intervened in Libya. The goal was presented as humanitarian intervention, but in reality, it was regime change operation. Muammar Gaddafi, who had been this stabilizing force in the Sahel region through economic and diplomatic support, he was removed from power. Libya descends into chaos, and that chaos, it had immediate devastating consequences for Mali. When Libya collapsed, it flooded the Sahel with weapons and militant fighters, weapons that Gaddafi's regime had controlled. They are suddenly everywhere. Tuareg fighters who have fought for Libya, they are returning home armed and organized. Jihadist groups that had been contained, they are finding new opportunities to expand. The direct spillover from Libya destabilized Mali and even the entire Sahel for over a decade now. Then you get French military interventions. Operation Barkhane, it lasted nearly a decade, cost France billions, claiming to fight terrorism. Yet, during those years, violence in Mali didn't decrease. It actually increased. JNIM grew stronger, not weaker. The instability deepened. French troops eventually withdrew. Actually, Mali expelled French troops. They left behind this legacy of failed counter-terrorism and unresolved conflict. But here is the thing. France wasn't there just to fight terrorism. France has deep interest in the Sahel's resources. Mali produces gold. The north, it hosts uranium. Algeria, just across the border, has a vast oil and gas reserve that France wants access to. This region is a resource frontier, and Western powers have long positioned themselves to control these resources. So, when Mali's military government takes power and expels France, they are disrupting that arrangement. They align with Russia. They start reasserting control over their natural resources. They refuse to play by Western rules. And suddenly, Mali becomes a problem that needs to be destabilized, not a partner to be supported. This context, it is essential to understanding why Western powers have this vested interest in making Mali look like it is failing. Now back to the fuel blockade, which have become this test of who could control the narrative. The West had one version. Mali had another, more realistic version. And what happened next? It reveals something crucial. about how information power works in global geopolitics. Western media and official statements, they are emphasizing JNIM as an Al-Qaeda affiliate that is gaining strength. They are talking about the group as this rising force nearly capable of overrunning Bamako, but they are avoiding mentioning JNIM's connections to external sponsors, the intelligence, the training, the resources that come from beyond Mali's borders. Instead, they are presenting JNIM as this purely internal terrorist threat, suggesting Mali's revolutionary government and its Russian advisors just aren't capable of handling it. But Mali's government, they are telling a different story. They acknowledge JNIM's attacks, sure, but they are framing them as tactical desperation, not strategic advancement. They are highlighting their own military capabilities, airstrikes, rapid response units, coordinated operations with neighboring AES countries, that is Burkina Faso and Niger Republic. They are now a confederation, and they are pointing out that terrorists are targeting economic infrastructure, not government positions. And think about that. That's not the strategy of a group about to seize power. That is the strategy of a weakening force trying to create panic. And here is where it gets provocative. Mali's officials are hinting at external involvement in stoking this crisis. They are suggesting that foreign powers, frustrated by Mali's sovereignty and refusal to comply with Western interests, they have an incentive to make Mali look weak. When the US representative at the United Nations downplayed JNIM's suspected connection to French-backed networks and external intelligence support, Mali saw it as deliberate omission. I mean, why would you avoid mentioning those connections unless you wanted to hide them? This is the narrative war we are seeing here. It's not just about describing events, it's about who gets to frame those events and what they mean. The West controls major media outlets, international platforms. Talk about social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they control it. Mali has to fight for its version to be heard. And when Mali's counter-narrative is stronger and more credible, it exposes the weakness in Western version, in Western narrative. It exposes all the lies, all the misinformation, and all the sabotage operation that is currently going on in the Sahel. The blockade didn't work the way the West narrative suggested it would, obviously. Think about it. If JNIM was truly on this unstoppable rise, if the Malian military was incapable and demoralized, if Russia couldn't provide adequate support, then the blockade should have led to government collapse. It didn't. Instead, Mali's response revealed military capabilities that completely contradicted the Western narrative of decline. Drone strikes are hitting militant positions, airstrikes targeting JNIM hideouts. The military is demonstrating coordination and speed. Supply convoys, they are successfully being escorted into the capital. Fuel stations begin restocking. Life gradually returns to normal. The crisis that Western analysts had described as potentially terminal, it was managed within weeks. What happened instead was this shift in JNIM tactics. Frustrated by direct military losses, the group starts attacking economic targets more systematically. They are striking gold mining operations, targeting cement factories, sugar plants. They are attempting to disrupt resource extraction. But this isn't the strategy of a group that is winning. This is the strategy of a group adapting to military defeat. They are trying to damage the economy indirectly, since they can't defeat the government directly, since they can't defeat the Malian military. And here is where the geopolitical dimension becomes really clear. JNIM's attacks on Mali's resource sector had this secondary effect. They disrupted economic activity that Russia and Mali's government were trying to develop. Recent agreement between Mali and Russia covered mining, energy infrastructure. Russia had just transitioned from Wagner to the official African Corps. The timing, it suggests that JNIM's intensified attacks might actually serve Western interests, weakening Mali's economic position and reducing the appeal of Russian partnership. Meanwhile, Mali's position, it is strengthening within the African context, because the alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they are demonstrating military cooperation, political solidarity, because joint operations and shared intelligence coordinated defense strategies. It's what this confederation is all about. So, this is exactly what the West had feared. African nations solving their own security problems without Western involvement, or should I say, their permission. Mali's situation isn't isolated. It's a template for this larger struggle that has been playing out across the continent. What Mali exposed was a pattern. Western powers maintaining control over African narratives and African security through selective disinformation, exaggerated threats, deliberate framing. When African nations take control of their own security and resources, they are immediately portrayed as failing, unstable, or captured by external insurgent actors. When they refuse to follow Western prescriptions, they are labeled authoritarian, undemocratic. The goal is delegitimize them, justify renewed Western intervention. For Pan-African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, and Ibrahim Chiani in Niger Republic, this is an existential battle line. They came to power promising to reclaim African sovereignty. They assert control over national resources, to refuse the conditionality that comes with Western aid and military support, to build regional cooperation among African states rather than depend on former colonial powers. And here is the thing, they are winning on the security front because despite what Western media claims, JNIM's offensive capacity hasn't increased after Mali expelled France and brought in Russian support. These terrorists are adapting, shifting tactics. The truth is, they are not advancing to take over Mali or Bamako. Mali has successfully managed the fuel crisis. Burkina Faso and Niger continue to resist external pressure. The AES alliance, it is actually strengthening. Now, this is what frightens Western powers. It's not that these nations are failing. It's that they are succeeding without Western involvement. Mali's ability to respond effectively to JNIM's blockade using its own military capabilities and Russian support, it is demonstrating that African solutions to African problems are possible, that Africa doesn't need Western permission or Western military intervention to solve its own security challenges. For the broader African continent, Mali has become this model. If Mali can assert sovereignty, reject foreign conditionality, build regional alliances, and successfully defend itself, other African nations can do that too. This is what real Pan-African unity looks like, not rhetoric, but practical cooperation and mutual defense. Mali has successfully exposed a massive foreign plot, but it's not a plot by terrorists to seize power. It's a plot by external powers to maintain control over the narrative of African instability. Think about what happened here. Western officials claim Mali was in crisis. They presented this version of events designed to make Mali look incapable, failing, dependent on Western intervention. When Mali demonstrated it wasn't failing, that it could respond effectively to challenges using its own capabilities and African partnerships, the Western narrative lost its power. The lie was eventually exposed. And this matters because narrative controls resources. They control international aid, investment decisions, diplomatic leverage. If Mali is portrayed as chaotic and unstable, Western companies hesitate to invest. International loans come with conditions. Pressure mounts for regime change. But if Mali is portrayed as capable, sovereign, and managing its own security, then African nations can control their own futures. The Sahel is at the center of this battle. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they are reasserting control over their territories, their resources, and their narratives. They are refusing to be defined by Western frameworks of failure and terrorism. They are building their own regional security architecture. They are developing economic partnerships with Russia, with Turkey, with China, countries that don't come with demands for democracy or regime change. Will this path be perfect? There is no perfect relationship or partnership or government anywhere in the world. It is not perfect. These revolutionary governments have real challenges. There are legitimate concerns, but the fundamental issue here is sovereignty. Who gets to decide Mali's future? Malians or external powers claiming to know what is best for Mali? That is what this moment represents. Not just a fuel crisis managed by a capable military, not just tactical victories against terrorist groups, but a turning point in whether Africa will control its own narrative, its own security, and its own resources. For the millions across the diaspora who believe in Pan-African sovereignty, who have watched decades of failed Western interventions, who want to see Africa rise on its own terms, Mali's exposure of this foreign plot, it is a victory, not complete, not total, but it is significant. A moment when an African nation said no to a false narrative and the world had to reckon with the truth. Now, if you have watched to this point, this is Frontline Africa. This is where we talk about geopolitics from Africa's own point of view. This is the second episode I am making on this particular issue because although our voice here is not as loud as the Western media machines, but we will try our best to say it to anybody who is interested in knowing the truth and the facts on the ground, especially in Mali and across Africa. In Nigeria, a situation is already developing. I can tell you because as a Nigerian, a lot has changed ever since Donald Trump made those threats of intervention in Nigeria. As I speak to you now, everything that Donald Trump was warning about, I can tell you that it has doubled in scale. There are more Christian killings, there are more terror attacks, there are more kidnappings and killing of the Nigerian military. And this is escalating fast. The Nigerian government officials are saying that these malign groups, these terrorist groups are being emboldened by the Western narrative of a Nigeria that has lost control of its security situation. So the Nigerian officials are saying that these terrorists are taking advantage of this escalation to intensify their attacks. But when I look at it personally, I get confused. Shouldn't they be worried about Western military coming to bomb them in their hideouts? Shouldn't they slow down their attacks? But instead of being rational and slow down, because nobody wants Western intervention in Africa, not Nigerians or the terrorists. So why are they intensifying their attacks? That is what is confusing at this moment. Why are they intensifying? They are almost like they want Donald Trump to bring his military. They want the intervention to happen. So there is an intensified attack right now in Nigeria. And it's all about information war. It's all about narrative control. Right now, the West have full control over the narrative situation, over the narrative of Nigerian own security. Mali has managed to regain control of their own narrative. Nigeria should try as much as possible to control the narrative. And we will do our best to say it exactly the way it is. And if you want to continue to see my content, maybe consider to subscribe and turn on those notifications. I am still your host, Ezekiel Enejeta, and I will see you in the next one. It's a bye-bye for now.